So, what would someone say? What do you think we mean when we talk about someone's will? What would you say that is? What's that? Purpose and plan. Anybody else?
Maybe desire.
Desire. Let's take a look at the meaning. The classic definition is it's a faculty of your mind. Just first thing to understand, you have to think in order to figure out the will. And you exercise it by doing something. You have to decide between two or more choices which one you're going to embrace and pursue. So, first of all, you're not pre-programmed. All right, you're going to learn in school. A lot of secular universities are going to tell you you are pre-programmed. That's just the way you are. You don't have free will. And yet the very definition of a person's will has to do with thinking. It has to do with your mind. When you're presented choices, how you decide which choice to take. So you have this idea of going in different directions, not sure which one to take. And then you have to dedicate to a decision. You're going to pick one of them. Just because you dedicate to a decision doesn't mean you're going to do it, though. There are commercials right now about, isn't it nice to have good intentions? Right? So you can decide, this is what I'm going to do, and there's a word called procrastinating, right? Where just because you've dedicated doesn't mean you actually jump, right? You have to demonstrate your decision with action to actually exercise your will. Most of us are really good in 1 and 2, but we never get to 3, right? Especially when it comes to sharing the gospel, when it comes to growing in Jesus Christ, when it comes to keeping commitments. Let's face it, it's boring and it's hard work. Christianity is hard work. I mean, it's a discipline. I love this verse in Joshua. Yeah, if you guys will open your Bible to Joshua 24, because everybody knows this verse, right? People have it hanging in their house all the time. We do. It's a great verse. Joshua is literally telling the nation of Israel about choices they're going to make. Now, let's go just a little before this verse to verse 13 and 14. Here's the Lord speaking. It's the covenant he's making with the nation. Verse 13, I've given you a land for which you did not labor, cities which you did not build, you dwell in them. You eat of the vineyards and the olive groves which you did not plant. We live at a time in America where most people come in, have absolutely nothing they can claim as having done anything to make our country the way it is. We talk about the founding fathers. They're actually the founding millennials. If you look at the average age, it's around 38, right? They're fairly young people. There's a few old guys like Ben Franklin, but they're mostly young. And they literally, it's a miracle when you study the Bill of Rights, when you study the Constitution, how they came up with this stuff. And yet they set a nation that we get to enjoy. Not only that, if I were to ask you, of all the institutions in America, police department, teachers, politicians, what do you think is the most trusted institution in America? Huh? Car salesman. I think you're probably not right. Anybody else? Universities. You know what it is? It runs between 78% of all Americans to 84%. The military. Most trusted institution. Is a perfect example of people who provide for us a freedom that we don't have to do anything for. I'll never forget 5-6 years ago, a soldier's in Iran, and on a side of a building it says, while we are going to war, America's going to the mall. Right? We live in a country where freedom isn't free. So that verse is talking about the Lord is telling these people, you're going to come in and you're going to get the benefits of the people I've driven out. You're going to get their homes, their vineyards. You're going to get all this. Verse 14, now therefore, fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and in truth. That's what this class is all about. Put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river and in Egypt. Serve the Lord. There's so much here. This is kind of fun to talk about. So let's talk about this for a minute. What does it mean to serve God in sincerity? Just be real. Look at your families. Are we dysfunctional or not? Families, right? Everybody does things. But yet, nobody's looking for perfection. God is amazing. When you read the Bible, how often you find these people that are the most famous people in the Bible that everybody looks up to, did some of the most terrible things. Absolutely terrible. But God looks at sincerity. Now, when we study in this book, we're going to study what does it mean to be truthful. And in the Greek, they would talk about being sincere. That word in the Greek means without wax. What it means is in those days when a sculptor would make a statue, there would be cracks, imperfections in it. So what they would do is they would take wax and fill it in and then paint the statue so you couldn't tell there were imperfections. So what people would do when they're buying statues is they'd take a candle and they'd run it next to the statue around it to see if any wax burned off. So when Paul admonishes Christians to be sincere, he's saying be without wax. That's what he means. Be real. Be who you are. Right? There's so much freedom in not having this conscience of always trying to hide things and justify the way you act. We don't have to do that with God. Right? Because he knows already. All right, so that's what he's saying here in verse 14. Serve in sincerity, just be real. Now comes our verse 15. If it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you'll serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river. So that's horrible. Literally, Joshua is getting ready to lead them into the promised land, and he's saying, you have a choice. Your forefathers served Baal, Chemosh, Molech, Dagon, all these foreign gods. And it's saying you can choose to serve one of those, or even the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. And then Joshua says, but not me, all right? I'm raising my kids, my wife. We're going to serve Yahweh. That's who we're going to serve. It's almost like he's indicting everyone, isn't it? He doesn't say, choose for yourselves if you'll serve Yahweh only. He says, you guys are all serving everyone else, not me. I'm serving Yahweh. So the people answered and said, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. Now remember, they've gone through the journey in the wilderness, right? While they're going through the journey in the wilderness, you had the golden calf incident. You had the murmuring over, I'm sick of manna. You had, there's no water. I want to go back to Egypt. Constantly, the Israelites were constantly complaining to Moses, I'd rather be in Egypt than be here in the wilderness. Does anybody, you guys hear me? Why? I mean, they saw the Red Sea part. I don't know about you guys, but if I'm being led out somewhere and they say, hey, it says in Exodus, literally Moses says, stand back and see the salvation of our Lord. The Egyptians who you see today, you will no longer see again. And he raises a staff up and the ocean splits in the middle. So what would you think? I'm on the right side. I mean, would you not? It doesn't take long. Within a month in the wilderness, they're saying, I want to go back. Why? You ever think about that? Think about America today. People are not interested in freedom. People want to be taken care of. People don't. What is wrong with freedom? Freedom sucks. Takes work. That's right. You have to be responsible. You have to get up and go to a job. You have to take care of yourself, right? So the Lord, the Ten Commandments start in a wonderful way. Exodus 20, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So God introduces himself to the Israelites because they don't know him and saying, first thing I want to make sure you understand is Moses didn't do this, it was me. And I'm bringing you out of slavery. It's a perfect proof text for why God does not condone slavery. He's taking them out of it, and he takes them into freedom. But people are like, I don't like freedom. I'd rather go be in bondage and slavery again. Is that crazy? So, verse 17, the Lord our God is he who brought us and our fathers up out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, slavery, who did those great signs in our sight, preserved us in the way that we went, and among all the people through whom we passed. Now this is Joshua talking. And the Lord drove out from before us all the people, even the Amorites who dwelled in the land. We also will serve the Lord, for he is God. So what they're doing, these people are responding. These are the people responding to Joshua. They're tying into the end of verse 15. Joshua said, as for me and my house, I'll serve the Lord. They're saying here in verse 18, we'll also serve the Lord. You see that? Now, verse 19. Joshua says, no, you won't. You cannot serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions nor your sins. He won't forgive you. Remember how often we've talked about this? This is hard today in our culture for Christians especially to understand. God cannot forgive you. He can't. As Christians, we'll sit there and go, you know why? I'm a Christian because I've been forgiven. No, you haven't. You have not. All it takes is for you to sin again, and God separates from you. Now, right now, everybody in here is going, you're hosed up, Ed, because that's not how we teach it in our church, right? This idea of holiness, I think we don't have an understanding of. There's only one way to have a relationship with Yahweh, with the Father. What's that one way? Jesus Christ. So what happens is there's only one way for the Father to be able to be near you. And that's if the Son represents you. The Son is your advocate. You cannot be forgiven for sin. Jesus Christ pays for the sin, and therefore the Father now can forgive you because the debt has been paid for by someone capable of it. So this is what he's saying in Joshua. He's jealous. He's a jealous God. If you forsake him and serve other gods, he'll turn and do you harm and consume you. Okay? This sounds like fun, huh? After he has done you good. So he'll do you good, then he'll consume you. So can you see why people in our culture who don't understand the Bible would think of God as a terrible person, cruel, because he's like, a dictator in North Korea. If you don't do this, I'm going to do that to you. Right? Guess what? He is. I just don't think we talk about it enough. Look at all while they're traveling in the wilderness. How many times does God say, I've had enough. I'm wiping them out? Do you remember? All the time. Why doesn't he? No? Huh? Somebody intercedes. The only way God the Father ever stops is when there's an intercessor, right? Now, I've done this before. I'm going off track for a minute. We'll talk about this. What's the most famous verse in the New Testament? Again, speaking in tongues. Somebody tell me John 3:16. Why did Jesus say that verse? What's the context behind it? He's talking to Nicodemus. So why did he say that? He said that because of a bronze serpent in the Old Testament. Let's go to John 3:16. To understand Yahweh and who the Father is, Jesus is giving us a picture of himself and who he is. So let me know when you're there. John 3:16. Nicodemus is struggling, right? It's actually kind of funny when we read it, look back and read it, where Jesus looks at him and goes, wait a minute, time out. You're the teacher of Israel and you don't know what I'm talking about? Right? Because he's talking about being born again. And Nicodemus is like, how do I get my mom's womb again? This makes no sense at all, right? He can't understand it. Well, in verse 9, Nicodemus says, how can these things be? Jesus says, you're the teacher and you don't know it? Now, here's a beautiful, beautiful verse to me. This is the Trinity again. It says, most assuredly, I say to you, we speak what we know and testify what we have seen, and you don't receive our witness. Jesus is talking collectively now of the Godhead. It's very similar to like at Sodom and Gomorrah, where Abraham's outside there and these people show up, these three guys show up, and they go, they're going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and they say to each other, should we tell Abraham what we're going to do? Right? So we have this witness of three people who share with Abraham. And what does Abraham do? Do you remember? What does he do when those three are talking about destroying Sodom and Gomorrah? Huh? Okay. Anybody a little deeper?
Ask if he can find righteousness.
He intercedes, right? So Abraham goes, but I know your character, God, and you want to destroy everyone. You know, if we could just find 50, would you, for 50 people? Okay, 50. Well, how about 20? How about 10? How about 5? One, just one, right? So we go through this, right? So here we have the same thing in John chapter 3, where Jesus is telling Nicodemus, you're not receiving our witness, the witness of the Trinity. Then he says, if I told you earthly things and you didn't believe it, how are you going to believe when I tell you heavenly things? No one has ascended to heaven, but he who came down from heaven, that is the Son of Man who is in heaven. Jesus' favorite title for himself is Son of Man. That's Daniel 7:13. We talk about this when we go through book 3. There's over, I wish I had the number in my head, almost 300 times throughout the Old Testament, I think it's 300, where the phrase Son of Man is used. Only once is it used for Messiah. Only once. Everything else is about a person. The one time is Daniel 7:13. Guess what verse Jesus quotes when he's in the midnight trial with the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees? This Daniel 7:13. That's why they said we're going to put him to death, because Jesus claims to be Son of Man. He's doing this with Nicodemus. He's saying he, as the Son of Man, is not limited by earth. He can come and go as he pleases and do anything. But then look what he says. Here we go. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Excuse me? And then he says in verse 15 that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. In Numbers 21, the story of the bronze serpent, if you remember, the people are murmuring, God's had it, he sends serpents among the people to bite them, and what does the bite do to them? Kills them. Moses says, no, don't, remember your covenant with Abraham, remember. And he goes, okay, Moses, here's what you need to do. I need you to take a pole, I need you to put a bronze serpent on it, I need you to raise it up, and anybody who gazes, in the Hebrew, looks intently on and focuses on, the bite from the serpents won't kill them and they'll live. That's Jesus Christ. This is what Jesus is saying. The reason he tells John 3:16 is because he's referencing to Nicodemus, who should be a teacher, that the story he's been teaching in the synagogue for all these years is about him. Follow? That's the power of having free will. Because God treats you that way. He gives you that honor of making a decision or not. So here in Joshua, when you read through that section, Joshua is literally saying to the Israelites, you're not going to follow him. I know you won't. And then they make a vow that they promise to do it. So that's why he says, me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Now, what's so special about Joshua? So God just picked somebody and said, hey, Moses, you've been doing a great job so far. You're pretty awesome, but you're getting old. You're like LeBron James. You're getting to the end of your career. We need somebody fresh and new to step in. Is that what happened?
Who was the spies that came back?
Okay, so he actually was faithful and would believe and follow him, right? Wasn't Moses? Was it Moses?
Moses did that thing with the rock where he said, like, he claimed that he would be the one to do it, and then God's like, well, it's not about you. Sorry, we're going to find someone else.
Yeah. So what happens is Joshua in chapter 24 is doing the same thing. He's saying, you know why you won't follow God? Because he's holy. All right, so the word holy is a big deal. We read it and we go, okay, holy. We keep going. All right? Now, Moses, it says in Exodus 33 and throughout the Old Testament, was God's best friend. He wasn't closer to anyone like he was to Moses. So God kind of sucks, right? Because Moses does everything right, seems like he's doing great. He does one thing, right? They're at the rock. God says to him, here's what I want you to do. Speak to the rock. Water will come out. People murmuring. When the water comes out, they can drink. He goes up and he says, you rebels, must we bring water from this rock? God pulls him aside and says, dude, I'm bringing water from the rock, not you. In everyone's eyes, I must be hallowed because I'm holy. Therefore, you will not lead the people into the land of Egypt, into the promised land. That's what happened. Now, some of you have heard this before, but I'm going to share with the class because I think this is so awesome. In Joshua 24:15, there's a deliberate point here that Joshua is making. He doesn't include everyone. He just says, me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Okay? So think back. You got Moses, Joshua, and the promised land. What's the promised land a picture of? Heaven. What's Moses a picture of? The law. Can the law get you into heaven? Interesting. You follow me so far? Joshua, what's the Hebrew name is Joshua. What's the Greek name? Jesus. Who gets you into heaven? John chapter 1. John chapter 1, verse 17. The law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. God didn't just say, you can't lead him in because I'm not hallowed. God orchestrated it so that Jesus leads him into heaven, Joshua. That's why Joshua says this, because he is committed, Jesus Christ, to follow his Father. So that's a beautiful picture right there of the gospel. The law can't get you into heaven, but Jesus can. Follow me? This is the little things as you study that get so exciting. There's no one like Jesus Christ. That's why we talk about him all the time. So I'm going to show you a video. This is at the University of Chicago. Ravi Zacharias is on stage, and an atheist student is debating him about free will, saying we don't have free will, saying we're determined. Okay? So take a listen to this.